Calling Trump a clear and present danger, a January 6 panel unanimously votes to subpoena ex-president. U.S. federal agency authorizes updated boosters for children 5 and older. Mental health patients in need of help left a difficult fate in Afghanistan. Global wildlife population sees 69% decline since 1970. Global recession likely in mid-2023, says J.P. Morgan head. 1,000-year-old Quran parchment pages to be auctioned. From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight. The U.S. House Committee investigating the January 6 insurrection at the Capitol voted Thursday to subpoena former President Donald Trump to testify before the panel. The 9-member committee voted unanimously to compel Trump's testimony and have him produce requested documents. Ahead of the vote, outgoing Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney said the committee now has sufficient information to answer many of the critical questions posed by Congress. But, she added, the panel now needs to hear from January 6 central player. Robert Reich, a University of California, Berkeley professor and former U.S. Labor Secretary, said a subpoena of a former president shouldn't be taken lightly. He added neither should staging an attempted coup to change the outcome of an election. The tents on Randall's Island in New York City are expected to provide temporary shelter for 500 adults as the city's homeless population has ballooned with the arrival of migrants. The asylum seekers were sent to the city on buses, mostly from Texas. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has bussed thousands of migrants crossing the Texas-Mexico border to other parts of the country. The strategy has become a lightning rod in the ongoing debate over immigration in the U.S. Over the past 6 months, Abbott, a Republican, has bussed migrants to Washington, D.C., New York, and Chicago, all large cities run by Democratic mayors. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration granted emergency use authorization Wednesday, expanding eligibility for updated COVID booster shots for children 5 years and older. Full approval was granted in September for children as young as 12. The FDA's action now clears the way for more youngsters to receive the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines, updated to address the subvariants of the Omicron strain. The Pfizer-BioNTech shot is authorized for children as young as 5, while Moderna's is for those 6 and older. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention must grant a final sign-off before the authorization can take effect. On Thursday, the White House flatly rejected Saudi Arabia's denial that OPEC oil production cuts it supported as the cartel's chair are political. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said the Saudi Foreign Ministry can try to spin or deflect, but the facts are simple. Kirby maintained the U.S.'s position that the action is a clear indication Riyadh is aligning itself with the Kremlin. He said the Saudis conveyed privately and publicly their intention to reduce oil production, knowing it would increase Russian revenues and weaken sanctions. The Biden administration presented Saudi officials with data showing there is no market basis for the 2 million barrel per day reduction agreed by OPEC. Kirby said other OPEC nations told the U.S. privately they disagreed with the Saudi decision, but felt coerced to support Saudi's direction. The Center for Study of Islam and Democracy and Texas's Southern Methodist University Human Rights Program hosted a recent webinar on blasphemy laws in Muslim-majority countries. It focused on how such laws violate the teachings of the Quran and human rights. The webinar was led by panelists Radwan Masmoudi, Mustafa Akyol, Ahmed Kuru, Khalid Abul Fadl, and Bashir Ahmed. It was moderated by Professor Sahar Aziz. Several panelists approached the issue from the perspective of the Quran. They noted there are no verses requiring violence to defend the Prophet or the religion. They said the Prophet himself took no action against those who insulted him or his teachings. They quoted the Quranic verse, "If you hear people denying and ridiculing God's revelation, do not sit with them unless they start to talk of other things." Washington's new restrictions disallow U.S. employees from helping China's semiconductor industry. American employees working for China's top firm have been told to stop taking part in component and machinery development. Beijing-based Naura Technology Group has asked its American engineers to stop working on research and development projects, the South China Morning Post reports. The order is being implemented with immediate effect, the paper said. Washington's new restrictions include strict and extensive export controls, besides disallowing U.S. citizens' involvement in key facilities on the Chinese mainland. Reports claim chip equipment suppliers are pulling out their U.S. staff from Chinese facilities, including the country's top memory chip maker, Yanxi Memory Technologies. Meanwhile, China's Semiconductor Industry Association on Thursday said it opposes the arbitrary move by Washington to ban China's chip technology. Global wildlife population has seen a 69% decline since 1970. Details after the break, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
I am what hunger looks like in America.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. The global wildlife population has declined on average 69% since 1970, a newly published report revealed on Thursday. According to the World Wildlife Fund study, wildlife population in Latin America and the Caribbean has recorded a worse decline by 94%. Global freshwater species have fallen steeply by 83%. The Living Planet Report 2022 revealed North America has seen a 20% biodiversity loss. Global biodiversity losses have been 66% in Africa, 18% in Europe and Central Asia, and 55% in the Asia-Pacific region. Habitat loss, species overexploitation, invasive species, pollution, climate change, and diseases are among the key factors of biodiversity decline, the report said. 3 1,000-year Quran vellum folios with Kufic and new scripts will soon be auctioned off in London. The 9th and 10th century parchment pages are included in the Chiswick auction sale of Islamic and Indian art on October 28th. The pages date from the early years of Islam. They show the evolution of calligraphy from the mature Kufic Abbasid style to the hybrid form of the new script. The Quranic script's evolution laid the groundwork for the development of the modern script in use today. The parchment folios most likely would have been once part of small multi-volume copies of the Quran popular in the 9th and 10th centuries. Their style tended to be simple, with each folio containing just a few lines of text. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said Monday a recession in the global and U.S. economy is likely by mid-2023. Rising inflation and interest rates in America and worldwide, along with Russia's war in Ukraine, are very serious factors that could cause a global recession, Dimon said. The U.S. Federal Reserve, among many central banks around the world, has been raising interest rates aggressively to fight inflation. Inflation in many countries is at the highest level seen in decades. Dimon said the Fed waited too long and did too little as inflation in the U.S. climbed to a record high in more than 40 years. Hundreds of thousands of people are at risk of dying of hunger in East Africa, the head of a regional bloc said Friday. The East African region is facing its longest dry spell in 40 years and the fourth drought in a decade, according to the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD. The regional group's membership comprises 8 East African countries: Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan, Kenya, and Uganda. Workman, executive secretary of the bloc, said more than 10 million children are suffering from acute malnutrition across 6 member states. Almost 13 million people currently are internally displaced in East Africa. The region also has roughly 5 million refugees and asylum seekers, IGAD reports. Mental health patients in need of help in Afghanistan are suffering due to the country's deep economic crisis and political uncertainties. Afghan patients who have been abandoned by their families due to mental and psychological problems are awaiting care and treatment in a home called Dalihain, or Madhouse. Abdus Salam, director of the Kandahar Dalihain, said all the people brought to the Dalihain are poor. Nobody asks about the health conditions of these people. Nobody cares. Sometimes some of their families come and get information about the health condition of their relatives. That's all. But unfortunately, no help has been sent to us by any person or institution. According to the data of the Ministry of Health of the Taliban interim government, 1 out of every 2 people in Afghan society suffers from mental and psychological disorders, while at least 20% of the population needs treatment in this direction. The number of Afghans whose mental and psychological health has deteriorated due to war, terrorism, economic crises, and drugs has risen. Treatment and care centers are either closing or cannot accept more patients due to financial difficulties. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an...
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No justice!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world? You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward. That lesson learned have brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. It's time for our in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
President Biden says in his announcement about the student debt relief that 20 million borrowers will have no debt left, and benefits go in total to 43 million borrowers. Is that all true? To discuss all of this with us is Professor Sam Workman. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Professor Workman is Director of Institute for Policy Research and Public Affairs at West Virginia University. So what is the President Biden's total announcement in this regard?
Well, I think the plan has sort of three ideas. The first is that you fix the public student loan program. The second is you extend the moratorium on payments until the end of the year, December 31st. And then finally, capping repayment at 5% of discretionary spending, which cuts it in half. It used to be 10%. And in addition to that, of course, the sort of the bell ringer of it all, which is $10,000 cancellation of debt for those making less than $125,000, and up to $20,000 for those who are on Pell Grants.
So, hey, is it something extraordinary or so-so or confusing?
I wouldn't say it's extraordinary. The thing is, these folks are still going to have debt. The real sort of impetus for this is the generation of Americans who we would call millennials, who could be anywhere from sort of 25 up to 42, 43 years old, who have really not been able to partake in the normal things that we would call sort of the American dream. So home ownership, safe transportation, the ability to pay for an education for their children. And so I think the concern there is that these folks are really struggling to partake in that. And then secondly, that has huge economic impacts down the road for folks who, may never own homes and whatnot. So I think that's the real impetus for this. But this doesn't fix, you have to understand, this does not fix the sort of soaring costs of college and the changing landscape of higher education. There's still going to be student loans going on, and in a lot of instances, they're quite effective.
So AOC says that not enough. Is she right? She's right.
I mean, I think that's hard to. I think that's hard to say. This will cancel debt for several million Americans, but still, the worth of a college degree in the United States is still a good 20% higher earnings for folks who graduate beyond those who don't go to college. So the student loan program is still very effective. What's really going on is a longer term trend of sort of transition in higher education to different models of operating public universities as institutions amid sort of declining sort of public, state support for higher education. And so a part of these changes that are driving these rising costs are really public universities adapting to that and getting on a footing where they can compete with nonprofit and private sector folks.
What about giving loan but without interest?
That's not how we do things here in America. And I think that in part, this is an effort a little bit to address that, right? Because the federal government is saying that they're going to take up the interest for folks who are not making enough money to pay that, so that they're not stuck in a situation where they're forever paying interest-only payments on things. But I think you have to have some element of interest to get private sector buy-in. Remember, it's the private sector that administer these loans ultimately. And so they're just guaranteed by the federal government. So there has to be some buy-in there for the private sector to be able to do this stuff. So,
Who qualifies for this debt forgiveness?
At the 10 grand level, anyone who makes 125K or less would qualify as long as they meet certain conditions. And then if you receive Pell Grants, which is a form of federal grant given to very low income students in the United States, it's possible to get up to 20K of relief.
The banks normally are not going to give without interest. But our not-for-profit sector is huge. And they do a whole lot of charitable things. Why a student loan cannot be taken by the not-for-profit sector instead of business?
Well, the thing to understand about the nonprofit sector is they compete on a footing which is a little more uncertain than established financial institutions, right? And so nonprofit sectors depend very often on, either government grants, which sometimes come and sometimes don't come, or they depend on philanthropy, and those aren't stable sources of funding for administering something as large as the student loan program. And so I think, and then on top of that, I think most, for very large programs like this, I think most research would tell you that government or private sector is a little more, it's not really about service delivery, it's more about stability and reliability of the service.
So how are they doing it when not in in recent past, interest rate had been zero?
Right. Well, the thing is, interest rates, that's a separate conversation and probably one to have with an economist, but interest rates are certainly part of the story, right? So early on in the student loan program, where we had Pell Grants were more robust in terms of actual expenses for things. We had much lower rates. And then, of course, over time, rates have drifted upwards towards 6%, I think is the average. And so there are economic reasons for that and sort of the economy of interest rates. And I'll leave that for someone else to talk about, but they've certainly gone up. And part of this too is it's not just an interest rate story, but I was like I was saying, is when you have sort of declining public support for public universities, and these are all policy decisions that originate in publics out there who are voting for things, right? Universities have to adjust and adapt, and some of those changes are more expensive. The other backdrop for this is changing technology, right? It used to be the case we didn't need classrooms that were wired for Wi-Fi and where everyone would have access to a laptop or a computer or something. So those technological expenses are very real. In the early days of higher education, you had one person who was sort of good with computers and they could help a bunch of people. And now we have whole departments for that, for instance. And so I think interest rates is part of the story, certainly, but also you just have the changing landscape for higher education that is both external and happens out there in the sort of the political world, but also internally, organizationally, where these institutions are adjusting to those transitions.
So what is next after President Biden's current announcement? Do you think steps like that will continue to be considered by Republicans and Democrats in future, or what other things need to be done from your perspective to decrease the burden of education?
Well, I think in general, I don't know that we're going to see a period where this broader sort of social and organizational transition is going to abate. This is a process of both the universities and students adapting to an environment where universities compete with nonprofit and private sector providers of instruction. And so, and need to find ways to fund themselves through grants and contracts and things like that. As long as that is the case, we're going to see, we're going to see college expense stay roughly the same. I think one point people are missing about this policy is this is not an act of Congress. It's not legislation. This is an executive order, a president doing something unilaterally. Those things are very sort of ephemeral in American politics because each president can issue a different executive order the first day they are in office. So I don't expect to see similar policies or policies like this to continue, at least with specificity to students, right? We might see it for other groups or whatnot, but I think this is a one-shot deal.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Workman, for your time.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.